You low-life scum.
A Reuters report from 2 weeks ago shows that dozens of communities in California have rates of childhood lead poisoning that even surpass those found in Flint. One of the more egregious examples, Fresno, where 13.6% of blood tests on children under 6 years of age showed high levels of lead, compared to just 5% in Flint. Fresno, as it happens, was also ranked number 7 on a list of America's 11 poorest cities in 2015. Or take St. Joseph, Missouri as another example. In this historic and seemingly quaint town that borders Kansas in the northwestern part of the state, 26% of residents live below the poverty line, compared to around 19% in the state as a whole and roughly 14.5% nationwide. According to information pulled by that in-depth Reuters investigation last year, in St. Joseph, up to 23% of children tested showed elevated levels of lead. Again, compare this to 5% in Flint. In Canton, Ohio, where the poverty level is a staggering 40%, over 50% of children tested in one area showed elevated lead levels. The average for the area is well above 40%, and in fact doesn't dip below 30 anywhere in the vicinity of this former heavy manufacturing center. A little further northwest, there's Cleveland, a city that ranked 9th in a 2016 Brookings analysis of 100 U.S. cities with the highest concentration of poverty. Here's what Reuters found. All those black spots, those indicate that 40% or more of those tested showed elevated levels. The darkest pink denotes between 35 and 40%. Moving east, let's look at Philly. The DNC was just there. The sun bounced off of black limos, and a posh center city seemed to speak of a city well off and booming. But that's not the case. Just last year, a couple of months before the DNC, a report came out showing that among the U.S.'s 10 largest cities, Philadelphia had the highest deep poverty rate. And here again, we see several instances of 40% or more of test subjects exhibiting elevated levels of lead. Indeed, if you zoom out, you'll find that Pennsylvania and surrounding areas are just littered with high levels of lead in test subjects, who again, were all children. And again, there's no amount of lead that's safe. But these kids had levels of lead in their blood that are above the level of concern, which according to the CDC is 5 micrograms per deciliter or higher. The CDC also points out that any instance showing elevated levels, not to mention more than 50% of a test population, requires a public health response, as any elevated levels can reduce IQ and stunt development, both mentally and physically. Now you'll notice that there are spots on the Reuters test map that are empty. As pointed out in their report, the available data includes 21 states, home to around 61% of the U.S. population. Health departments in some states didn't possess the data or respond to records requests. Others wouldn't share it, saying they weren't required to or citing patient privacy laws. Privacy over public health. I mean, unless you're we the people, then fuck your privacy, as evidenced by the largest surveillance network in the history of humanity, bolstered last week by the move in Congress to sell your private information to companies looking to, rummage around a bit. But yeah, have some lead with your spying eyes, be it in water, lead-based paint, or even in the air you breathe. It's quite clear that there is a grotesque lead poisoning problem in this country, despite the fact that officials claim a job well done due to lead regulations passed in previous decades. The problem is that regulation really means fuck all if it isn't backed by action. So the CDC says there's a public health emergency in roughly 3,000 areas across the U.S., as per that Reuters report. So what? It's kind of like the UN saying that the situation in Gaza is evidence of human rights violations by the Israeli state. Yeah, no shit. But without action, it's just a label. And in communities labeled toxics that are also labeled poor, it's unlikely that they'll see any government action on their behalf. A study by Scientific American in late 2012 showed that poor minority neighborhoods are more likely to be exposed to higher levels of air pollution than their white, affluent counterparts. And of course, the rich and white tend to live further away from industries and their toxic runoff. It's actually pretty unusual that you get a case where, for instance, an ExxonMobil CEO joins a lawsuit against fracking in his backyard, although that did happen. You might have heard of him, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, the oozing pus boil in a human flesh suit that couldn't give a rat's ass about public health until him and his family are considered part of the public. And so it follows that because our government is made up of millionaires and billionaires, the consideration for public health outside the confines of the country club is limited at best. Remarking on a 2016 NRDC study that found that more than 18 million Americans drink from lead-laden water, NRDC President Rhea Su said, "The bottom line is that the lead is found in drinking water in cities well beyond Flint, often affecting vulnerable lower-income communities of color. Unsafe drinking water is a national problem that needs a national solution." The report goes on to outline how 18 million is really kind of a conservative estimate due to rigged testing of water supplies and lax, if not wholly non-existent, enforcement. Sounds a lot like what investigators with Reuters noticed in their attempts to test the country's children for lead. Using privacy as an excuse to keep public health records from the public? Rigging the tests so you won't have to deal with the shitty enforcement that might not even be in place. This isn't an expired license we're fucking talking about. This is mass poisoning of children, of adults too. This is a national fucking emergency. Flint has gone almost 3 years without clean drinking water. How long have these other areas been shoving toxins into their kids, their adults, the land, and the animals? And how much longer will it be before the millions drinking their own demise perish under the weight of capitalist malfeasance? How sick do we have to get before health becomes a priority? Of course, the problem is, if we're asking that question, we already have the answer. As I mentioned in my talk here in Australia at Zeitgeist Fest this past week, either capitalism will kill us or we will kill capitalism. There is no third trajectory for a system built on endless extraction and thereby oppression. There will never be a convenient time to stand up and fight. Uncomfortable must become our new comfort zone, and ungovernable must be our new citizenship. For the sake of we, the people, against the low-life scum.
You low-life scum.